On his wedding day, my son confessed in front of all the guests, "I've always hated my name. I'm ashamed to be the son of this old man." Everyone laughed as he humiliated our family, but he had no idea the name came from billionaires. That same week, I inherited $200 million. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is John Vincent Blackwood, and at 61 years old, I thought I had experienced every kind of pain life could offer. I was wrong. The morning of my son's wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes you believe in new beginnings. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie I had bought specifically for this occasion. It wasn't expensive, nothing in my closet ever was. But it was new, and it was blue, Vincent's favorite color when he was little. My hands trembled slightly as I worked the knot, not from age, but from excitement. After months of feeling like an outsider in my own son's wedding planning, today I would finally see him happy. Today I would stand proud as his father, watching him begin the life I had worked so hard to give him. The ceremony was beautiful. St. Matthew's Cathedral, with its soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the marble floors. I had never been in a church so grand. The pews were filled with people I didn't recognize, friends of Vincent and his bride Sarah from their law school days, colleagues from the prestigious firm where they both worked, family members from Sarah's side who looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. I sat in the second row, not the first. Sarah's parents occupied that space, as was fitting since they had paid for everything. I didn't mind. I was just grateful to be there, to witness this moment I had dreamed about since Vincent was born. When Vincent walked down the aisle, my chest swelled with pride. He looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, confident and successful, everything I had hoped he would become. For a moment our eyes met, and I thought I saw a flicker of something, maybe gratitude, maybe love. I was probably imagining it. The reception was held at the Rosewood Country Club, a place where I had once worked as a groundskeeper during my 20s, back when Vincent was small and I was scrambling to pay for daycare. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now I was here as a guest, wearing my department store suit among people in designer clothing that cost more than I made in 3 months. I found my assigned table near the back of the ballroom. Table 14. I sat with distant relatives of Sarah's that I had never met, nice enough people who made polite conversation about the weather and the lovely flowers. I smiled and nodded, but my attention kept drifting to the head table where Vincent sat with his new wife, laughing at something someone had whispered in his ear. The speeches began after dinner. Sarah's father spoke eloquently about love and partnership. The best man, Vincent's law school roommate, shared amusing stories about their college days. Then the maid of honor, Sarah's sister, took the microphone. She was talking about names, about how names carry meaning and legacy, how Sarah had chosen to hyphenate, keeping both her family name and taking Vincent's. She mentioned how beautiful it sounded, Sarah Martinez Blackwood, and how it represented the joining of two proud families. That's when Vincent stood up. I remember the moment with perfect clarity, the way you remember a car accident or the moment you receive devastating news. He didn't ask for the microphone. He simply took it from Sarah's sister, his movements quick and determined. The room fell silent, hundreds of faces turning toward him expectantly. I leaned forward in my chair, assuming he wanted to add something sweet about his new wife, maybe thank everyone for coming. Instead, he cleared his throat and said words that will echo in my mind until my dying day. I need to say something about names, since we're on the topic. His voice was steady, confident, carrying easily across the silent ballroom. I've always hated my name, Blackwood. It sounds so pretentious, so old-fashioned, like something from a dusty history book. A few people chuckled nervously. I felt my stomach begin to knot. Growing up with this name was embarrassing. Kids at school would make jokes about it, call me Blackboard or Deadwood, but the worst part wasn't the teasing from other kids. The worst part was being ashamed to be the son of this old man. He gestured toward me, and suddenly every eye in the room was on my face. I felt the blood drain from my cheeks as murmurs rippled through the crowd. John Blackwood, my father, the guy who spent his life jumping from one minimum wage job to another, a groundskeeper, a janitor, a night shift security guard, never ambitious enough to make something of himself, never successful enough to give our family name any real meaning. The laughter that followed wasn't nervous anymore. It was genuine, cruel, the kind of laughter that comes when people feel superior to someone else's misfortune. I sat frozen in my chair, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. But today that changes, Vincent continued. his voice gaining momentum. Today I marry into the Martinez family, a family with real success, real achievement, and Sarah, being the incredible woman she is, has agreed to hyphenate. So while I'm stuck with Blackwood, at least now it comes with Martinez, which actually means something. More laughter, louder this time. Someone at a nearby table whispered something about upgrading the family name, and others nodded in agreement. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. Instead, I sat there and endured every word, every laugh, every pitying glance from the people around me. Vincent raised his champagne glass. So here's to new beginnings, to leaving behind what doesn't serve us, and to building something better with the people who truly matter. The toast that followed felt like thunder in my ears. Hundreds of glasses clinking, hundreds of voices saying, "Cheers," while I sat motionless, my own glass untouched on the table. I don't remember much about the rest of the reception. People avoided my table after that, as if my shame were contagious. When the dancing began, I slipped out through a side door and sat in my 12-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot, staring at the steering wheel and trying to make sense of what had just happened. My son, the boy I had raised alone after his mother died when he was 8, the child I had worked 3 jobs to support through college, had just publicly declared his shame at being my son. Not just disappointment in my lack of success, but actual embarrassment at sharing my name. I drove home to my small apartment in a daze, still wearing my wedding tie, still carrying the boutonniere that no one had pinned to my lapel because Vincent had been too busy with the photographer to notice I was standing there waiting. That night, I sat on my worn couch and tried to understand where I had gone wrong. I had given Vincent everything I could, sacrificed everything I had. I had believed that love would be enough, that seeing my dedication would teach him the values that mattered. Instead, I had raised a man who measured worth by bank account balances and social status. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation, though that cut deep. The worst part was the realization that my son truly saw me as a failure, as something to be ashamed of. And maybe, I thought as I finally loosened that blue tie, maybe he was right. I had no idea that within a week, everything I thought I knew about my name, my family, and my worth would change forever. The week following Vincent's wedding passed in a blur of sleepless nights and haunting memories. I called in sick to my job at the hardware store, something I had never done in 15 years of employment. Mrs. Henderson, my supervisor, sounded concerned when I phoned in Tuesday morning with a hoarse voice, claiming I had caught something at the wedding. If only she knew what I had really caught, a brutal understanding of how my son truly saw me. I spent those days replaying moments from Vincent's childhood, searching for signs I had missed. Clues that should have warned me this day would come. The memories came in waves, each one more painful than the last because now I could see them through his eyes, tainted by the shame he felt. I remembered Vincent at 7 years old, during parent-teacher conferences at his elementary school. I would arrive straight from my landscaping job, dirt still under my fingernails despite scrubbing them raw in the school bathroom. The other parents wore business suits and carried leather briefcases. I wore work boots and carried a thermos of coffee because I couldn't afford the fancy drinks from the coffee shop across the street. Vincent would sit beside me during these meetings, his small hand sometimes slipping into mine when Mrs. Patterson, his teacher, would praise his academic performance. Back then I thought he was proud of me for being there, for caring enough to show up despite my exhaustion. Now I wondered if he was already learning to feel embarrassed by the contrast between us and the other families. When Vincent was 12, his middle school held a career day. Parents were invited to speak about their professions, to inspire the next generation. I remember Vincent coming home with the permission slip, his face carefully neutral as he handed it to me. "Do you want me to come speak?" I had asked, genuinely eager to participate in his school life. "What would you talk about?" He replied, not meeting my eyes. "Well, I could talk about landscaping, about taking care of the environment, or maybe about the security work I do, how it's important to keep people safe." Vincent had shrugged. "I guess. But Tommy's dad is a doctor, and Sarah's mom is a lawyer. Maybe you could just not come this time." I had agreed, telling myself he was just being a typical 12-year-old boy, embarrassed by his parents' involvement. I convinced myself it was normal. But the permission slip never got turned in, and I never found out if other blue-collar parents spoke that day, or if Vincent had simply decided my work wasn't worth sharing. High school brought new challenges. Vincent was academically gifted, that much was clear from early on. His grades were impeccable, his SAT scores exceptional. But with academic success came exposure to families with resources I couldn't provide. I remember the night he came home junior year, excited about a school trip to Washington, D.C. The cost was $800, not including spending money. I had been working double shifts at the security company, trying to save money for his college applications, and $800 might as well have been $8,000. I'll figure it out, I had told him, already calculating which bills I could delay, which meals I could skip. But Vincent's expression had shifted from excitement to something else, resignation maybe, or disappointment. "Don't worry about it, Dad. It's not that important." "No, Vincent, if you want to go, we'll make it work." I said, "Don't worry about it." His voice had been sharp, final. "Besides, it's probably just a bunch of boring museums anyway." I had worked extra shifts for 3 weeks, sold my guitar, the one thing I owned that had any real value, and scraped together the money. When I handed him the cash, he had taken it without enthusiasm. "Thanks," he had mumbled, but there was no joy in it. Later, I learned from another parent that most of the kids on that trip had spending money of $300 or $400 each. Vincent had gone with $60 I had managed to put together for meals and souvenirs. I wondered how that felt for him, watching his classmates buy expensive gifts while he counted every dollar. College brought its own humiliations, though I didn't recognize them as such at the time. Vincent was accepted to several prestigious universities, but the financial aid packages weren't enough to cover everything. I took out a second mortgage on the small house we lived in then, the house his mother and I had bought when we were young and optimistic about the future. I also worked a third job, cleaning offices at night after my day shift at the landscaping company and evening shift doing security. There were weeks I saw Vincent only when I dropped off grocery money or helped him with paperwork for school. I was so exhausted I could barely think straight, but I was proud of the sacrifice. I thought I was showing him what love looked like. During his sophomore year, Vincent called me from school. It was unusual. He rarely called just to talk. "Dad, you know how you're always working all those jobs?" "Yeah, son. What about it?" "Some of my friends were asking about what you do for work, and I didn't really know how to explain it. I had felt a flutter of worry." "What do you mean?" "I mean, most of their parents have like one job, one career." I told them you do landscaping. But then they asked if you owned a landscaping company, and I had to say no. Then I mentioned the security thing, and they asked if you were like a police officer or something, and I had to say no to that too. The conversation had continued for several more uncomfortable minutes, with Vincent trying to find a way to describe my work that sounded more prestigious than it was. I had ended the call feeling confused and hurt, but I pushed those feelings aside. He was just trying to fit in with kids from wealthier families. That was normal, wasn't it? By his senior year, the distance between us had grown into a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. When he graduated magna cum laude, I sat in the audience wearing the same suit I had worn to every important event for the past 5 years. The seams were starting to fray, but it was clean and pressed. After the ceremony, I waited in line with the other families to take pictures with their graduates. When it was our turn, Vincent smiled for the camera, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. In the photo that sits on my kitchen table today, you can see the contrast clearly. Vincent in his cap and gown, radiating success and possibility, and me beside him, looking exactly like what I was. A tired, aging man who had given everything he had and somehow still fallen short. Law school was the final chapter of our relationship as I knew it. The student loans were enormous, but Vincent qualified for some grants and scholarships that helped. I continued working my multiple jobs, sending him what I could for living expenses. Our phone calls became less frequent, our visits even rarer. When he graduated from law school and got the job at the prestigious firm, I was genuinely proud. I bragged about him to anyone who would listen at work, showing pictures from his graduation to my coworkers who nodded politely and offered congratulations. But Vincent's success seemed to make him more distant, not closer. When he called to tell me about the job, there was excitement in his voice, but it felt like he was sharing news with an acquaintance, not his father. "That's wonderful, son. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Dad. Listen, the job comes with some pretty demanding hours, so I probably won't be able to call as often." I had understood. Or I thought I did. Success required sacrifice, and Vincent was building the kind of life I had always dreamed he could have. When he called to tell me about Sarah, I was thrilled. She sounded perfect for him. Educated, ambitious, from a good family. When they got engaged, I asked if there was anything I could do to help with the wedding. Thanks, Dad, but Sarah's parents are handling most of it. They have experience with this kind of thing. This kind of thing. Even then, the phrase had stung a little. Now, sitting in my quiet apartment 5 days after the wedding, I finally understood what this kind of thing meant. It meant weddings where the father of the groom doesn't have to worry about the cost of his outfit, where families have histories of success and achievement, where names carry weight and respect. I had spent Vincent's entire life trying to give him opportunities I never had, working myself to exhaustion to ensure he could reach heights I never dreamed of. But in doing so, I had also given him something I never intended. A deep, abiding shame at where he came from. The phone rang Wednesday evening, breaking through my thoughts. I let it ring 4 times before answering, hoping it might be Vincent calling to apologize, to explain, to somehow take back the words that had shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship. It wasn't Vincent. It was a voice I didn't recognize, professional and crisp. "Is this John Vincent Blackwood?" "Yes, this is John." "Mr. Blackwood, this is Margaret Chen from the law firm of Harrison, Chen and Associates. I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding a matter of inheritance. Are you available to come to our office this Friday afternoon?" I nearly laughed. Inheritance? The only thing anyone in my family had ever inherited was debt and disappointment. "I think you might have the wrong person," I said. "John Vincent Blackwood, born October 15, 1962, son of Elizabeth Marie Blackwood, deceased?" My breath caught. Nobody had mentioned my mother's name to me in years. "Yes, that's me. But there must be some mistake. My mother didn't have anything to leave to anyone." "Mr. Blackwood," Margaret Chen said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I think you're going to find that there are quite a few things about your mother that you didn't know." I arrived at Harrison, Chen and Associates 15 minutes early, sitting in my Honda in the parking garage and staring up at the gleaming 40-story building that housed their offices. The law firm occupied floors 35 through 38, according to the directory I had studied online. This wasn't the kind of place where people like me usually had business. The elevator ride to the 36th floor felt like ascending to another world. The reception area was all marble and mahogany, with artwork that probably cost more than I made in a year. I gave my name to the receptionist, a young woman who smiled politely, and asked me to take a seat. I had worn my best clothes, the same navy suit from Vincent's wedding, but even cleaned and pressed, it felt shabby in these surroundings. Other people in the waiting area wore the kind of expensive clothing that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. I tried not to fidget with my tie as I waited. "Mr. Blackwood?" A woman approached, extending her hand. She was Asian American, probably in her 40s, with an air of quiet competence. "I'm Margaret Chen. Thank you for coming in today." Her office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the city. She gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, then settled across from me with a thick manila folder. "Mr. Blackwood, what I'm about to tell you may come as quite a shock. Before I begin, I need to verify some information about your family history." I nodded, though my palms were sweating. "Whatever you need to know. Your mother was Elizabeth Marie Blackwood, maiden name Elizabeth Marie Whitmore?" "Yes, that's right." "And she died when you were approximately 7 years old?" 6, actually. "I was 6 when she died of cancer." Margaret Chen made a note in the file. "And after her death, you were raised by your father, Robert Blackwood?" "Yes. Dad did his best, but he wasn't. He struggled after Mom died. He worked construction, drank too much, died of a heart attack when I was 19. She nodded sympathetically. "Mr. Blackwood, did your mother ever mention her family to you? Her parents, siblings, any relatives from before she married your father?" I thought back, trying to remember conversations from when I was 5 or 6 years old. "Not really. Dad always said she didn't have much family, that her parents had died before I was born. I assumed we were pretty much alone in the world." "I see." Margaret Chen opened the manila folder and withdrew several documents. "Mr. Blackwood, your mother's maiden name was Whitmore, but her family name before that was actually Blackwood." I stared at her, confused. "I don't understand."
Elizabeth Marie Blackwood was your mother's married name, yes, but it was also her birth name. She was born Elizabeth Marie Blackwood, daughter of Vincent Charles Blackwood and Margaret Rose Blackwood. The room seemed to tilt slightly.
Are you saying my parents had the same last name by coincidence? Not by coincidence, no.
Your parents were distant cousins, both descendants of the same Blackwood family line, though from different branches. Your mother was from what you might call the wealthy branch of the family tree. She slid a document across the desk to me. It was a family tree, professionally prepared with names and dates going back generations. At the top was a name I recognized: Vincent Charles Blackwood. My grandfather, Margaret Chen continued, was Vincent Charles Blackwood, founder of Blackwood Industries. Perhaps you've heard of the company? I had. Blackwood Industries was one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the country, with interests in everything from steel production to real estate development. Their name was on buildings throughout the city, including the hospital where Vincent had been born. Your mother was the only daughter of Vincent Charles Blackwood. She stood to inherit a significant portion of the family fortune. My head was spinning, but that's impossible. We never had any money. We lived in a tiny apartment, and after Dad died, I could barely afford to keep it. Margaret Chen's expression softened. Your mother made a choice, Mr. Blackwood. When she decided to marry your father, her family disapproved. Robert Blackwood was a good man, but he wasn't from their social circle. He worked with his hands, had no college education, no prospects for the kind of life they expected for their daughter. So they disowned her? Not exactly. They gave her an ultimatum. She could marry Robert and forfeit her inheritance, or she could leave him and maintain her place in the family. She chose love. I felt something tight in my chest, a mixture of pride and grief for the mother I barely remembered. She gave up a fortune for my father. She did, but here's where the story becomes more complicated. Margaret Chen withdrew another document from the folder. Your grandfather, Vincent Charles Blackwood, was devastated by his daughter's choice, but he never stopped loving her. When he died in 1988, he left instructions in his will that if Elizabeth ever had children, and if those children carried the Blackwood name, they would be entitled to her original inheritance. But she died in 1975. I said slowly, yes. Which means the inheritance has been held in trust, accumulating interest and investment returns, waiting for her heir to come forward. She slid another paper toward me, and when I saw the number at the bottom, I thought there had been a mistake. $200 million, Margaret Chen said quietly. That's the current value of your inheritance, Mr. Blackwood. The words didn't compute. I stared at the paper, reading the number over and over. $200 million. It was more money than I could truly comprehend, an amount that belonged in news stories about lottery winners or tech billionaires, not in conversations with tired hardware store employees. There has to be some mistake, I said finally. There's no mistake. I've been the executor of this trust for the past 12 years, ever since my predecessor retired. We've been searching for Elizabeth's heir that entire time, searching for me, but I've lived in the same area my whole life. You've moved several times and you were listed under different variations of your name in various records. John Blackwood, J. Vincent Blackwood, John V. Blackwood. It wasn't until you applied for that small business loan 3 years ago, the one where you used your full legal name, John Vincent Blackwood, that our investigators were able to locate you definitively. I remembered that loan application. I had applied for $15,000 to maybe start a small landscaping business, thinking it might be time to work for myself instead of for other people. The loan had been denied. Now I was being told I was worth $200 million. I need you to understand something important, Margaret Chen continued. This inheritance comes with a specific stipulation from your grandfather's will. The money was left specifically for Elizabeth's heir, who carries the Blackwood name with honor. Your grandfather believed that names matter, that they carry the weight of family history and values. She paused, watching my reaction carefully. Mr. Blackwood, your grandfather chose the name Vincent for himself because it means conquering in Latin. He built an empire from nothing, starting as a factory worker and eventually owning dozens of companies. He believed that a name should represent strength, perseverance, and integrity. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. Here I was, learning that the name my son was ashamed of, the name he had publicly mocked just days ago, was actually connected to one of the most successful business dynasties in American history. What happens now? I asked. Now you have some decisions to make. The money is yours, legally and unequivocally. There are some tax implications we'll need to discuss, and there are various investment options to consider, but the inheritance is yours to do with as you please. She handed me another folder, thicker than the first. This contains all the documentation you'll need, as well as information about your grandfather's businesses and your mother's original trust fund. I should mention that Blackwood Industries is still family-controlled. Your cousin, Richard Blackwood, currently serves as CEO, and he's been informed of your existence. My cousin, your mother had a younger brother, Thomas. Richard is Thomas's son. He's actually quite eager to meet you. I sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process everything I had learned. My entire understanding of who I was, where I came from, had just been turned upside down. The mother I barely remembered had been an heiress who gave up everything for love. The father I thought was just a struggling construction worker had actually been brave enough to marry above his station and make it work. And the name I carried, the name Vincent had been so ashamed of, was the name of a man who had built an empire. Mr. Blackwood, Margaret Chen said gently, I know this is overwhelming. You don't need to make any decisions today, but I do want you to know that your grandfather would have been very proud of the man you've become. How could you possibly know that? She smiled. Because I've read his journals, his letters to your mother after she married your father. He kept track of her life from a distance, and after she died, he kept track of yours. He knew about your struggles, your dedication to your son, the sacrifices you made. In his final letter, the one he left to be given to you if you were ever found, he wrote that he hoped you would understand that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love and sacrifice we offer to our families. She reached into the folder one more time and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. This is for you, from your grandfather. I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name was written on the front in careful script. For John Vincent Blackwood, my grandson, with love and pride. I'll leave you alone to read that, Margaret Chen said, standing up. Take all the time you need. When you're ready, we can discuss the practical aspects of your inheritance. She left the office, closing the door softly behind her. I sat alone in that luxurious space, holding a letter from a grandfather I had never known existed, trying to comprehend that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. But even as I broke the seal on that envelope, one thought kept running through my mind. Vincent had no idea. The son who was ashamed of the Blackwood name had no idea that it was connected to a fortune that could buy and sell his law firm several times over. The question was, what was I going to do with that knowledge? I sat alone in Margaret Chen's office, my grandfather's letter trembling in my hands. The envelope was thick, substantial, the kind of paper that spoke of quality and permanence. I carefully opened it, afraid that after all these years the paper might crumble at my touch. The letter was written in the same careful script as my name on the envelope, the handwriting of a man accustomed to important documents and weighty decisions. My dear grandson, John Vincent, if you are reading this letter, it means that you have survived the challenges that I knew would come your way and that you have grown into the man I hoped you would become. I am writing this in 1987, and though I have never met you, I feel I know you through the reports I receive and through the character I see in your mother, my beloved daughter Elizabeth. By now, Margaret has told you about your inheritance, and you are probably wondering why I left you money while allowing you to struggle for so many years. The answer is both simple and complex. I could have intervened at any time. I could have helped when your father died, when you were working multiple jobs to support yourself, when you sacrificed everything to give your son an education. I chose not to because I needed to know what kind of man you would become when faced with real hardship. I paused in my reading, feeling a mixture of anger and confusion. He had watched me struggle and chosen not to help. You must understand, John, that I was not born wealthy. I started with nothing, working in a steel mill for 12 hours a day, saving every penny. I built Blackwood Industries from the ground up, and in doing so, I learned that money without character is worthless, while character without money is invaluable. You have proven your character through your actions, your dedication to your family, your willingness to sacrifice for others. Your mother faced a terrible choice when she decided to marry your father. My wife and I opposed the marriage not because Robert was a bad man, but because we had seen too many wealthy families destroyed by people who married for money rather than love. We gave Elizabeth an ultimatum, believing she would choose financial security over uncertain love. We were wrong, and we were fools. Elizabeth taught me the most important lesson of my life, that love and integrity matter more than social position or wealth. She showed me that the Blackwood name should represent not just financial success, but moral courage. She chose love over money, and in doing so, she honored our family name more than any business achievement ever could. The tears came without warning, sliding down my cheeks as I read about the mother I barely remembered. I had always imagined her as a simple woman who married a simple man and lived a simple life. To learn that she had been faced with such an impossible choice, and that she had chosen my father despite the cost, filled me with a pride I had never felt before. I want you to understand something about the name you carry, John Vincent. You were named for me, yes, but more than that, you were named for what I hoped you would represent. Vincent means conquering, but not in the way most people think. True conquest is not about defeating others, but about overcoming yourself, your limitations, your fears. You have conquered poverty without losing your compassion. You have conquered hardship without losing your integrity. You have conquered disappointment without losing your love for your family. The money I am leaving you is not a reward for suffering, but a tool for building something better. Use it wisely, but more importantly, use it to honor the values your mother taught through her example. Remember that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. I regret that I never had the courage to reach out to your mother after she married your father. I regret that I let pride and stubbornness prevent me from knowing you as a child. But I do not regret the man you have become, because reports of your character tell me that you are everything I could have hoped for in a grandson. Carry the Blackwood name with pride, John Vincent, not because of the money associated with it, but because of the honor you have brought to it through your actions. With love and respect, your grandfather, Vincent Charles Blackwood. P.S. The ring in this envelope belonged to your mother. She left it behind when she married your father, but I kept it hoping that someday it might return to the family. I believe she would want you to have it. I looked in the envelope again and found a small velvet box I had missed before. Inside was a simple but elegant ring, a gold band with a small diamond surrounded by sapphires. It was beautiful in an understated way, the kind of jewelry that spoke of quiet wealth rather than flashy display. I slipped the ring into my pocket and read the letter again, trying to absorb everything it revealed about my family, my mother, and myself. When Margaret Chen returned to the office 20 minutes later, she found me sitting quietly, the letter folded in my lap. "Are you all right, Mr. Blackwood?" "I think so. It's just a lot to take in." She sat down across from me again, her expression kind but professional. "I imagine it is. Do you have any questions about the inheritance or about your grandfather's letter?" He mentioned reports about my life. "How detailed were these reports?" Margaret Chen hesitated. "Your grandfather hired private investigators to keep track of your mother's life, and after she died, your life, not to interfere, but to stay informed. He knew about your struggles, your jobs, your dedication to your son. He knew when Vincent was accepted to college, when he graduated law school, when he got engaged." A thought struck me like a physical blow. Does that mean he knew about the wedding? About what Vincent said? The investigators file reports monthly. The most recent report was submitted this past Monday. So my grandfather's people knew that my son had publicly declared his shame at carrying the Blackwood name, just days after I had inherited $200 million, specifically because I had honored that name. The irony was so profound, it was almost painful. "What happens now?" I asked. "That's entirely up to you. The money is yours without conditions or restrictions. You can live quietly, invest conservatively, and never worry about money again. You can be philanthropic, use the wealth to help others as your grandfather did in his later years. You can involve yourself in Blackwood Industries if that interests you. Or you can do something entirely different. What about my cousin Richard? He's expressed interest in meeting you, but there's no pressure. He runs the day-to-day operations of the company very successfully. Your inheritance is separate from the business, though you do own a small percentage of company stock as part of the trust." I sat quietly for a moment thinking about Vincent. Just 5 days ago, he had stood in front of hundreds of people and declared his embarrassment at being a Blackwood. He had married into what he considered a more prestigious family, believing that his own name was worthless. "Can I ask you a hypothetical question?" I said finally. "Of course." "If someone were to research the Blackwood family name, what would they find?" Margaret Chen smiled. "They would find one of the most respected business dynasties in American history. Blackwood Industries has been featured on the cover of Fortune magazine 6 times. Your grandfather was inducted into the Business Hall of Fame. The Blackwood Foundation, which your grandfather established, has donated over $500 million to education and healthcare initiatives. And if someone searched for Vincent Charles Blackwood specifically, they would find that he's considered one of the most successful self-made businessmen of the 20th century. Several universities have business schools named after him. There's a biography about him that was on the New York Times bestseller list for 18 weeks. I nodded slowly. One more question. Is this information publicly available, or would someone need to do specific research to find it? The basic information is readily available online. Anyone with an internet connection could learn about your grandfather's achievements and the Blackwood family history within 15 minutes of searching. The implications of this settled over me like a weight. Vincent worked at a prestigious law firm where success and status mattered enormously. If any of his colleagues decided to research his family name, they would discover that he was connected to one of the most successful business families in the country. Instead of being ashamed of the Blackwood name, he should have been proud of it, but he didn't know. He had spent his entire life thinking he came from nothing, believing that his father was just a failure who had given him a worthless name. He had no idea that the very name he mocked was connected to achievements that would impress even his most successful colleagues. Mr. Blackwood, Margaret Chen said gently, I can see that you're processing a lot of information. Would you like me to arrange for you to meet with our financial advisors? They can help you understand your options for managing the inheritance. Yes, I think that would be helpful, but not today. I need some time to think about all of this. Of course. Take all the time you need. Here's my direct number, she said, handing me a business card. Call me when you're ready to move forward or if you have any questions. I stood up to leave, then paused at the door. Margaret, you mentioned that my cousin Richard knows about me. Does he know about my son? He knows you have a son named Vincent who recently married. He's actually quite pleased that the family name has continued to another generation. I nodded and left the office, my mind reeling with everything I had learned. In the elevator down to the parking garage, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished metal doors. I looked the same as I had that morning, but I felt like a completely different person. I was no longer John Blackwood, the struggling hardware store employee whose son was ashamed of him. I was John Vincent Blackwood, heir to one of the most successful business dynasties in America, grandson of a man who had built an empire and son of a woman who had chosen love over fortune. The question that haunted me as I drove home was simple. What was I going to do with this knowledge? Vincent had made his feelings about our family name devastatingly clear. He was ashamed to be my son, embarrassed by what he saw as my failures and lack of ambition. He had publicly declared that the Blackwood name meant nothing, that it needed to be elevated by his marriage into the Martinez family. I had the power to change his perspective instantly. One conversation, one revelation about his grandfather's fortune and achievements, and Vincent would understand that he had been wrong about everything. He would realize that the name he had mocked was actually worth more than he could have imagined. But as I pulled into the parking lot of my small apartment complex, another thought occurred to me. If I told Vincent about the inheritance, would his change of heart be genuine, or would it simply be greed disguised as newfound respect? The Vincent who had stood up at his wedding reception was someone I didn't recognize, someone who measured worth in dollars and status rather than character and love. Would that same Vincent suddenly respect his father if he learned about the $200 million inheritance? Or would he simply see an opportunity? I sat in my car for a long time that evening, my grandfather's letter in my pocket and my mother's ring in my hand, trying to decide what kind of man I wanted to be with this new knowledge. The choice I made would determine not just my future, but the future of my relationship with my son. And for the first time since that devastating wedding speech, I realized that the power in our relationship had fundamentally shifted. Vincent just didn't know it yet. 2 weeks passed after my meeting with Margaret Chen, and I felt like I was living in two different worlds. During the day, I went to work at the hardware store, helping customers choose the right screws for their home projects and mixing paint colors, pretending that my biggest concern was whether we had enough inventory for the weekend rush. But underneath that familiar routine, I carried the weight of a secret that felt heavier with each passing day. I hadn't told anyone about the inheritance. Not my supervisor at work, not my few friends, and certainly not Vincent. The knowledge sat inside me like a stone, growing heavier each time I remembered his words from the wedding reception. Being ashamed to be the son of this old man. Those words replayed in my mind constantly, but now they carried a different sting. It wasn't just the pain of rejection anymore. It was the bitter irony of knowing that my son had publicly mocked the very name that connected him to more wealth and prestige than he could have imagined. 3 days after the meeting with Margaret Chen, Vincent had finally called me, not to apologize as I had briefly hoped, but to inform me that he and Sarah were back from their honeymoon in Italy. "Dad, we're having people over for dinner this Saturday. Sarah's parents, some friends from work. You should come." The invitation felt like an afterthought, the kind of duty call adult children make to aging parents when guilt finally overcomes their better judgment. "What time?" I had asked. 7 o'clock. "But Dad, maybe wear something a little nicer than usual." Sarah's been talking about how important first impressions are. Even after everything that had happened at the wedding, he was still trying to manage my appearance, still worried that I would embarrass him. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. If Vincent only knew that I could write a check for more money than everyone at his dinner party would earn in their lifetimes combined. "I'll see what I can do," I had said. That Saturday evening, I stood in front of my closet, debating what to wear. My instinct was to put on my best outfit, the wedding suit, but something held me back. Instead, I chose khakis and a simple button-down shirt. Clean, presentable, but clearly not expensive. If Vincent was still ashamed of who I appeared to be, then perhaps he needed to sit with that shame a little longer. Vincent and Sarah's apartment was in one of the newer developments downtown, the kind of place where young professionals lived when they wanted to signal their success. The building had a doorman and marble floors in the lobby. I gave my name and was directed to the 18th floor. Sarah answered the door wearing a dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. She smiled, but I could see her quickly assess my outfit and find it wanting. "John, so good to see you again. Come in, everyone's in the living room." The apartment was beautifully decorated in what I assumed was the Style magazine definition of sophisticated. Everything matched, nothing looked lived in. It was the kind of place designed to impress visitors rather than comfort the people who live there. Vincent appeared at my side, and I could see him taking in my appearance with barely concealed disappointment. "Dad, let me introduce you to some people." The introductions were painful in their careful politeness. Sarah's parents, both doctors, shook my hand and made polite conversation about the weather. Vincent's colleagues from the law firm asked what I did for work, and I watched Vincent's jaw tighten when I mentioned the hardware store. "That must be interesting work," one of them said, the kind of response that really meant, "I'm sorry for your life choices." During dinner, the conversation naturally turned to careers and achievements. Sarah's father discussed a recent medical conference where he had presented research. One of Vincent's colleagues talked about a high-profile case they had won. Vincent himself shared news about a promotion opportunity at his firm. I sat quietly, eating the catered meal that Sarah had presented as her own cooking, and listened to these successful people discuss their successful lives. Nobody asked me about my work beyond that initial awkward exchange. I had been categorized and dismissed, exactly as Vincent had intended. "It's so important to build something meaningful with your career," Sarah's mother said at one point, looking directly at me. "To leave a legacy that your children can be proud of." The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. Here I was, heir to a business empire that employed thousands of people and had donated hundreds of millions to charity, being lectured about building a meaningful legacy by people who had no idea what real legacy looked like. Vincent nodded enthusiastically at his mother-in-law's comment. "That's exactly what Sarah and I are trying to do. We want to build something substantial, something that really matters." "Unlike some people," I thought I heard Sarah whisper to her mother, though I couldn't be certain. After dinner, while the others moved to the living room for coffee and continued conversation about their important careers, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Vincent. He was loading the dishwasher with aggressive efficiency, his movements sharp with barely controlled frustration. "Everything okay?" I asked. He didn't look up from the plates he was stacking. "Fine. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was gripping the dishes too tightly. Something was bothering him beyond my presence at his dinner party. "Vincent, what's really going on?" He finally looked at me, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable in his expression, something that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful mask he wore around me now. If you must know, there are some concerns at the firm about my family background. My stomach tightened. What kind of concerns? Someone mentioned to one of the senior partners that my father works in retail. Not that he owns a business, not that he's in sales management, but that he works at a hardware store. It's not the kind of family background they expect from associates they're considering for partnership. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only was Vincent ashamed of me, but my existence was actually threatening his career prospects. The son I had sacrificed everything for was being held back by his association with me. I see, I said quietly. Do you really see, Dad? This isn't just about me anymore. Sarah's career matters too. We're trying to build something here, and having a father who, he gestured vaguely at me, unable to finish the sentence. Having a father who what, Vincent? He sighed, running his hands through his hair. Having a father who never accomplished anything meaningful. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but it's the truth. I've worked my entire life to get where I am, and now it feels like I'm being held back by things I can't control. The anger that rose in me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. Not just anger at Vincent's cruelty, but anger at the unfairness of it all. Here he was, worried about his reputation being damaged by his association with me, while I sat on enough money to buy the law firm where he worked. What would you like me to do about it? I asked, keeping my voice level. I don't know, maybe be less visible for a while. Sarah and I are hosting some important people over the next few months, clients and senior partners. It might be better if you weren't around for those events. You want me to hide. I want you to understand that this is a critical time for my career, for our careers. Sarah's parents have already noticed the differences between our families, and it's embarrassing. Embarrassing, I repeated. Yes, embarrassing. Is that really so hard to understand? You show up to my wedding in a department store suit. You work at a hardware store. You drive a 12-year-old car. Everything about your life screams failure, and now that failure is reflecting on me. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. In the living room, I could hear Sarah's mother laughing at something someone had said. Normal dinner party sounds from normal successful people living their normal successful lives. I should go, I said finally. Vincent nodded, looking relieved. That's probably best. Thank you for understanding. I walked back through the living room, making polite excuses about needing to get home early. Sarah's parents smiled and said it was lovely to meet me, their voices carrying that particular tone people use when they're relieved someone is leaving. Sarah walked me to the door. John, thank you so much for coming. I hope you understand that Vincent is just under a lot of pressure at work right now. I understand perfectly, I said. And I did understand. I understood that my son had become exactly the kind of person my grandfather had worried about when he gave my mother that ultimatum all those years ago. Vincent was someone who valued appearance over substance, status over character, money over family. The ride home in my 12-year-old Honda gave me plenty of time to think. I could solve all of Vincent's problems with a single conversation. I could tell him about the inheritance, about our family's real history, about the fact that the Blackwood name was actually one of the most respected names in American business. But would that change who Vincent was? Or would it just give him a different reason to be arrogant? By the time I reached my apartment, I had made a decision. Vincent was worried about his reputation being damaged by his association with me. He wanted me to be less visible, to hide from his important friends and colleagues. Fine. I could be less visible, but not in the way he expected. The next morning, I called Margaret Chen and scheduled another meeting. It was time to start making some changes in my life. Vincent wanted to distance himself from the failure he thought I represented. Instead, I was going to become someone he would never have the chance to be ashamed of again, but I wasn't going to tell him about it. Let him worry about his reputation while having no idea that his father had just become one of the wealthiest men in the city. Let him continue to think he was being held back by my lack of success while I quietly built something he could never touch. Vincent wanted me to disappear from his life. I was going to grant that wish, but on my terms, not his. The phone call with Margaret Chen was brief. I'm ready to move forward with everything, I told her. The investments, meeting my cousin, all of it. But I want to do this quietly. Very quietly. Of course, Mr. Blackwood, discretion is always our priority. And Margaret, I'd like to start using my full name for all business purposes. John Vincent Blackwood. I think it's time I honored my grandfather's legacy properly. I think your grandfather would be very pleased with that decision. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Not anger, not sadness, but a calm sense of purpose. Vincent had made his choice about what kind of relationship he wanted with his father. Now I was going to make mine. The irony was perfect. Vincent was ashamed of the Blackwood name and wanted to distance himself from it. Meanwhile, I was about to embrace that name fully and build something with it that would dwarf anything Vincent could ever achieve. He would probably never even know what he had lost. 6 months later, I sat in the oak-paneled boardroom of Blackwood Industries, looking out at the city skyline through windows that reached from floor to ceiling. The view from the 40th floor was spectacular, but what struck me most was how different the world looked from this height, both literally and figuratively. My cousin Richard had been everything Margaret Chen had promised, welcoming me into the family business with genuine warmth and respect. He was 5 years younger than me, with graying temples and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from being born into success but having earned the right to keep it. "Your grandfather would have loved this," he had said during our first meeting, gesturing around the executive conference room, the heir to the Blackwood name taking his rightful place in the family legacy. I had started slowly, learning about the businesses, understanding the investments, getting comfortable with the weight of real responsibility. Richard had been patient, introducing me to key people gradually, allowing me to find my own place within the company structure. The money itself had been transformative, but not in the way I had expected. Yes, I had moved from my small apartment to a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood. Yes, I drove a car that started every time and had heat that actually worked. But the real change was deeper than material comfort. For the first time in my life, I felt valued. The people I worked with respected my opinions, listened to my ideas, treated me like someone whose thoughts mattered. It was intoxicating after decades of being dismissed and overlooked. Vincent knew nothing about any of it. I had kept my promise to be less visible in his life, but not in the way he had intended. I still worked at the hardware store 2 days a week, maintaining the appearance of my old life for anyone who might be watching. But the other 3 days, I wore expensive suits and sat in boardrooms, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. The transformation hadn't gone completely unnoticed. Mrs. Henderson at the hardware store had mentioned that I seemed different, more confident. "You're standing taller these days, John," she had said. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." But Vincent remained oblivious. Our interactions had become even less frequent since that disastrous dinner party. He called once a month, dutiful but distant, usually with some excuse for why he couldn't see me. Too busy with work, too many social obligations, too much traveling for business. I didn't mind. Each conversation reminded me of the choice I had made and confirmed that it was the right one. Today, however, was different. Today, Richard had shared news that changed everything. "The Martinez law firm," he had said, sliding a file across the conference table. "They've been courting us for months, trying to land our corporate legal business. It's a substantial contract, probably worth $2 to $3 million annually to whichever firm we choose." I had looked at the file, though I already knew what I would find. Martinez, Rodriguez, and Associates, Sarah's family firm, the prestigious practice that had given Vincent such pride when he married into their family. "They've submitted a very competitive proposal," Richard continued. "Their lead attorney on corporate matters is—" He paused, checking his notes. "Vincent Blackwood. Apparently he recently married into the Martinez family, and they're featuring him prominently in their pitch." The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. Vincent, who had spent months worried that his association with me would damage his career, was now unknowingly trying to win business from the very company that made me one of the wealthiest men in the city. "What do you think?" Richard asked. "Should we consider their proposal seriously?" I could have said yes. I could have steered the contract toward Vincent's firm, given him the professional success he craved, without him ever knowing it came from the father he was ashamed of. It would have been the ultimate act of love, helping my son succeed while allowing him to maintain his illusion of independence. But as I sat there looking at Vincent's name on the proposal, I realized something important. Helping Vincent succeed wouldn't change who he had become. It would only reinforce his belief that success came from cutting ties with anything he considered beneath him. "Actually," I said, "I think we should pass on this one." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Any particular reason?" "Their proposal is solid." "I prefer to work with firms that value family loyalty," I said simply. 2 weeks later, the news reached Vincent that Blackwood Industries had chosen a different firm for their legal work. I heard about his reaction through Margaret Chen, who stayed connected to legal community gossip. "Apparently your son was quite upset," she told me during one of our regular meetings. "He had been counting on that contract to secure his partnership at the Martinez firm. Without it, his position there is less certain." I felt a small pang of something that might have been guilt, but it passed quickly. Vincent had made his priorities clear. Professional advancement mattered more to him than family relationships. If that approach sometimes led to disappointment, then perhaps that was a lesson worth learning. Spring turned to summer, and my new life continued to evolve. I had quietly joined the boards of several charitable organizations, using my resources to support causes my grandfather had cared about: education for underprivileged children, health care for the elderly, job training programs for people trying to rebuild their lives. It was during one of these board meetings that I met Catherine Morrison, a retired teacher who ran a literacy program for adults. She was probably close to my age, with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life filled with joy despite its challenges. We started having coffee after the board meetings, talking about books and travel and the satisfaction of using resources to help others. She knew nothing about my past, nothing about my struggles with Vincent. To her, I was simply John Blackwood, a successful businessman who cared about making a difference. "You have such a kind heart," she told me one afternoon as we sat in a cafe downtown. "It's rare to meet someone who's achieved success but hasn't lost their humanity in the process." If only she knew, I thought, that my humanity had been forged in decades of struggle and disappointment, that my success was measured not just in dollars, but in my ability to maintain dignity in the face of my own son's rejection. It was Catherine who was with me the day I made my final decision about Vincent. We had just finished lunch and were walking through the park when my phone rang. Vincent's name appeared on the screen, and after weeks of no contact, something made me answer. "Dad, I need to ask you something." His voice was strained, different from his usual carefully controlled tone. "What is it, Vincent?" "Have you ever heard of a company called Blackwood Industries?" My heart stopped. "Why do you ask?" "Because they just donated $50,000 to Sarah's father's medical research foundation. The donation came with a note saying it was in honor of someone named Elizabeth Blackwood." Sarah's father was curious about the connection. I was quiet for so long that Vincent finally said, "Dad, are you there? I'm here. Do you know anything about this Elizabeth Blackwood? The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it." This was the moment. Vincent had unknowingly stumbled across the trail that led back to our family's real history. One simple answer from me, and everything would change. He would learn about the money, about our grandfather's empire, about the fact that the name he was ashamed of was connected to more success than he could imagine. But as I stood there in the park with Catherine watching me with concern, I realized that the moment for that revelation had passed. Vincent had made his choice about what kind of son he wanted to be. Now I had made my choice about what kind of father I would be in response. "Elizabeth was your grandmother," I said finally. "My mother. She died when I was very young." "Oh." Vincent sounded confused. "But why would this company donate money in her honor? She wasn't. She wasn't anyone important, was she?" Anyone important. Even now, even when faced with evidence that contradicted his assumptions, Vincent couldn't imagine that his father's side of the family might have any significance. "She was important to me," I said simply. "Right, of course. I just meant, never mind. I should go. Sarah's waiting for me." "Vincent," I said before he could hang up. "Yeah? Take care of yourself." "You too, Dad." I hung up and stood there holding my phone, watching people in the park going about their normal Saturday afternoon activities. Families having picnics, children playing on swings, couples walking hand in hand. Catherine touched my arm gently. "Are you all right?" "I think I am," I said, and realized it was true. That evening, I sat in my study writing a letter. Not to Vincent, but to Margaret Chen, with instructions for my will. The Blackwood fortune would continue to fund charitable causes, education programs, and medical research. Vincent would receive a comfortable inheritance when I died, enough to ensure he never had to worry about money, but not enough to fundamentally change who he was. The bulk of the estate would go to establishing the Elizabeth Blackwood Foundation, dedicated to helping people rebuild their lives after difficult circumstances. People like I had been, like my mother had been, like my grandfather had been before he built his empire. As I wrote, I thought about the choice my mother had made all those years ago. She had chosen love over money, family over status, character over comfort. She had given up a fortune to marry my father, and in doing so, she had given me something more valuable than any inheritance, an example of what real integrity looked like. Vincent had made his choice too. He had chosen success over family, appearance over substance, status over love. I couldn't change that choice, but I could choose how to respond to it. I sealed the letter and set it aside, then walked out to my garden where I had planted roses in honor of my mother. They were blooming beautifully, their fragrance filling the evening air. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. I had honored my grandfather's legacy by using the Blackwood name and fortune responsibly. I had honored my mother's memory by choosing character over revenge, and I had honored my own values by refusing to let Vincent's rejection diminish my sense of worth. Vincent might never know what he had lost when he chose to be ashamed of his father, but that was his burden to carry, not mine. I was finally free of the need for his approval, his respect, his love. I had found my own worth, built my own legacy, created my own family among the people who valued character over status. The Blackwood name would continue to mean something important, something honorable, just not to Vincent. And somehow that was enough.